Hello, I'm Christina Brown. This is Our Take on Arise TV, a talk show focused on the topics and stories related and of interest to women. And today I have Michaela Angela Davis as my guest co-host. She is a cultural critic, image activist, and writer about almost everything: race, gender, style, and fashion. Michaela, thank you for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. This is great.
And we actually had you here on Our Take. Was it last week? Week before last? Week before last, and we were talking about that New York exhibit, Touch My Hair.
Yes.
Which, interestingly enough, we got quite a bit of feedback, not only about the exhibit itself, but also about your hair. Your beautiful hair.
My happy hair. That's what I call it. It's happy hair.
Happy hair.
Yes.
You write about so many different things, to include hair, to include image, to include, as I said, race, gender. What are some of the things that pique your interest? You see it and you say, I have to put pen to paper now.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I think it all is encompassed in image, right? And that's why, you know, I identify as an image activist. But to be honest, I'm interested in a lot of things, but I'm interested in looking at things through the lens of black women. So whatever the news of the day is, even, say, the Zimmerman or Trayvon Martin case, I look at Sabrina Fulton. I look at where's the black woman in this scenario? Where's the black woman in Egypt? Where's the black woman in, you know, in hip-hop? Whatever is happening, I see if there's a specific angle that touches black women, our lens, because I don't feel like we're often the lens in which stories are told. So,
and interestingly enough about that, even in telling the story of the black woman, I mean, we're not a monolithic voice.
Absolutely not.
So even in telling that story, there's still a diversity of voices and interests and perspectives as well.
You know what also, I'm very interested in pro-story, like I'm pro-black girl versus anti, you know, anything. I like to talk about things that really elevate what's good and expand the narrative versus what I call, you know, staying stuck in the struggle conversation.
Sure.
I feel like the generation before me did so much legitimate struggle that I feel a real responsibility that we get into the solution and that we stay in the strategy. Not to say that there isn't struggle, Lord knows.
Right, right.
But not to be stuck there. So I also look at...
So move the conversation forward.
Yeah, and look at, you know, where we rock and where things are really happening so that we can kind of be an example. So I'm really interested, I mean, injustice is also something that always, you know, sparks my interest, but I'm like really interested in love and justice, you know, and sisterhood and justice.
Oh, well, then there is a permanent seat for you here because this is the place where we are absolutely talking about those stories.
Yes.
And not only talking about them, but we're hoping to inspire
yes.
our viewers as well and show our viewers how they can make their own changes in their community and their world for better. So I'm sure there will be no shortage of things for you to weigh in on for today's show because we've got a lot of beefy topics. First of all, topping the Daily Take news headlines, we head out to Egypt. That's where President Morsi says even if it costs him his life, he will not go anywhere. It is the latest Morsi has proposed a compromise. There are competing, however, demonstrations, and a Morsi advisor has said that there is a possible coup underway. People are now waiting for more announcements. Military armed forces threatened to take over. More than 20 people were killed in recent violence. The U.S., however, provides $1.3 billion in military aid annually. This is an image that we have seen play out in a number of different places around the world. Meanwhile, closer to home, Our Take's coverage of the trial of George Zimmerman continues with testimony about whether the neighborhood watchman knew of Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Zimmerman is charged in the shooting death of teenager Trayvon Martin. Judge Deborah Nelson ruled in favor of the prosecution, allowing them to introduce evidence that showed Zimmerman's interest in law. Testimony appears to bolster the state's claim that Zimmerman was an aggressive wannabe cop. Yesterday, however, a medical examiner testified Zimmerman's injuries from his fight with Trayvon Martin appeared minor. Michaela, where do you begin as an image activist, as someone who has written extensively about a number of different issues? Where do you begin with this case?
Well, you know, it's interesting because, as I said earlier, I was very interested in Sabrina Fulton when the
Trayvon's mom.
Yeah, when it first started. And I actually did a campaign called Stand With Sabrina, where we supported her as she faced her first Mother's Day without her son. And so since then, I've been really emotionally attached, as are millions of people, to this case. And watching it play out now, it makes it very real. Before, it was kind of like this removed story, but watching the case has made it very real that there's a boy that is murdered, and there's some very interesting characters starting to emerge. And I'm actually quite relieved that this evidence is becoming relevant, because it's setting up a character and a pattern. Because, you know, a lot of people, there's a lot to say about this case, but there's one really core idea to me that if George Zimmerman did not get out of his car, Trayvon Martin would be alive today.
Right.
I mean, just that basic. And how is a man that has a car and a gun afraid of an unarmed? So, you know, there's a lot of sketchy things that can be disputed, but those two things, like, how are you afraid? You've got the weapon, and you've got a place that secured out of the rain.
And the thing is, these are things that were certainly out when it comes to the court of public opinion. But now that we are seeing testimony and evidence entered into trial, there's no more speculation, right?
Yes.
Now we know for sure. We hear, for example, we heard last week George Zimmerman's voice on the 911 tapes. We heard a dispatch police officer say, you know, no need to follow him. We heard from witnesses. We heard from Rachel Gentile. I'm sure that has to be another woman that you're looking at extensively. Rachel Gentile, who is Trayvon Martin's friend, who was on the phone with him just moments before he died. You know, we're finally hearing some things that were just speculation in the months that led up to the trial that are concrete. Even Rachel Gentile's role in all of this, and also how she was depicted and kind of criticized.
Well, you know, what was so fascinating about Rachel is that what she did is she showed America a part of our world that very few people pay attention to. They pay very little attention to black urban youth. And here she was, a girl that I think a lot of us who know the community know her, you know, but because black young bodies aren't interesting until there's some kind of violent story around them, there's this lack of understanding of what she looked like. And there was a lot of criticism from a lot of people. She's just suspicious because she's black, she's female, she's other. So I think that it sparked a really, really critical conversation that we have to understand how little people know about the breadth of the black community, and how there's certain kind of respectable black people, and then there are people that aren't. Like, she speaks three languages, you know what I mean? So,
but she also faced a lot of criticism, at least online, even from within our community, within the African-American community, that wanted to, I think, in many ways, kind of distance itself as well.
It's a class thing, too, just like Gabby Douglas.
Yes.
Like, we have been conditioned, and I think we talked about this before, we've been conditioned to compare rather than relate. So we see an image of a black girl. The first thing we start doing is attacking what's wrong. Her hair, her skin, her weight, her diction. This is a girl that was traumatized, 19 years old, and she's traumatized. Or this is a girl, meaning Gabby, who's a champion. And we're really going to talk about her hair clips?
And she's also really the voice of Trayvon Martin. As well. I mean, she really is his presence in the courtroom, letting us know what he was saying and what he was feeling in those moments before his encounter with the George Zimmerman. But I think we're definitely going to get back to Rachel Gentile, because, as you know, later on in the show, we're going to be exploring a documentary that really centers on the influencers when it comes to young girls and black women's perception of ourselves. So we'll get back to that. I do want to move on now and take a look at our health. A huge announcement coming from the White House. Businesses now have more than 50 people. Businesses that now have more than 50 people have another year before they are required to provide health insurance to their employees. Meanwhile, in other health news, National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month is underway, and people are sharing their personal stories on Twitter. It's part of a campaign called No Shame Day. Reaching out for help may be vital, but a report today says women are dying from overdoses of prescription painkillers at an alarming rate. The CDC says nearly 48,000 women have died from prescription drug overdoses. Now, that is a 5-fold increase in the last day. A lot of headlines coming out of that Our Health segment, but as you and I were discussing a little earlier before the show, I think one of the things that is so significant is this No Shame Day campaign that Twitter has launched, which has really encouraged people to tweet and share their personal stories and personal struggles with regards to mental health.
I think stigma is what keeps a lot of us from being healthy. And I challenge anyone to not look into their self or their family where there's not some mental illness, particularly in the Black community. When you think of communities that have come from trauma, that have come from oppression, I mean, we have people in our family that lived through the Jim Crow South. So there's post-traumatic stress disorder as a direct result of Jim Crow. You know, it's homeland terrorism. So there's a lot of emotional things and emotional trauma that we haven't dealt with. So it's something like if something's wrong with your knee,
you go see a doctor.
Right.
But also in the Black community, I think what you'll see more in our community and other communities is, I don't know if pressure is necessarily the right word.
Don't
but
talk about it.
Not only don't talk about it, but the expectation to simply pray it away, right?
Yes.
I certainly came, right? I certainly came from a household where the idea of going to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, you know, that was something that either white people did or people with money did. You know, if you had problems, you went to church, you took it to the Lord, you prayed on it. And there's nothing that says that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but that does in some cases keep people from getting the mental health help that they really need.
That's such a critical point, and what is so unfortunate is that it's such a great combination to have a strong spiritual and religious life and therapy. Sometimes God says, get thee to a therapist, if you're listening. You know what I mean?
The doctors too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are doctors that go to church. So sometimes, you know, that may be the prayer, but we're putting too much pressure. You know, this is mental and it's scientific. It's like you can't pray for science, right? So I think a lot of us don't see therapists as actual scientific studied doctors, and it is such a great, they balance each other out in a really good way. You can take care of your entire self, your mental and your spiritual self.
Yeah. Well, we are on Facebook, and of course we're on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter by simply going to @OurTakeAriseTV, but you can like and leave comments on our Facebook page by heading to Our Take on Arise TV. I'm Christina Brown, and you're watching Our Take.